Hey there, and welcome back. For this lecture, we are going to talk about the helminths and why we study them in microbiology. So, why do we study helminths in microbiology? Parasitic helminths are animals that are often included within the study of micro because many species of these worms are identified by their microscopic eggs and larvae. There are two major groups of parasitic helminths, the roundworms, the Nematode, and the flatworms, the Platyhelminthes. Of the many species that exist in these groups, about half are parasitic, and some are important human pathogens. As animals, they are multicellular and have organ systems. However, the parasitic species often have limited digestive tracts, nervous systems, and locomotor abilities. The phylum Nematode, the roundworms, is a diverse group containing more than 15,000 species, of which several are important human parasites. These unsegmented worms have full digestive systems, even when parasitic, and some are common intestinal parasites, and their eggs can sometimes be identified in feces found around the anus of infected individuals. So Ascaris lumbricoides is the largest nematode intestinal parasite found in humans. Females can reach lengths of greater than 1 meter or 3 feet long. Ascaris is also very widespread and even in developed nations, although it's now relatively uncommon as a problem in the United States. It may cause symptoms ranging from relatively mild, such as a cough and mild abdominal pain, to severe, such as intestinal blockages or impaired growth if it's found in kids. Of all nematode infections in the United States, pinworm, caused by Enterobius formicularis, is the most common. Pinworm causes sleeplessness and itching around the anus, where the female worms lay their eggs during the night. Toxocara canis and Toxocara cati are nematodes found in dogs and cats, respectively, and these can be sometimes transmitted to humans, causing toxocariasis. Antibodies to these parasites have been found in approximately 13.9 or 14% of the human population in the U.S., suggesting that exposure is pretty common. Infection can cause larval migraines, in which can result in vision loss and eye inflammation, or fever, fatigue, coughing, and abdominal pain, depending on whether or not the organism infects the eye or the viscera. Another common nematode infection is the hookworm. We don't really have these in the United States, but they are common in tropical countries. And it's caused by Necator americanus, the New World or North American hookworm, and Encyclostoma duodenale, the Old World hookworm. Symptoms of hookworm's infections can include abdominal pain, diarrhea, loss of appetite, weight loss, fatigue, and anemia. Trichinellosis, also called trichiniasis, is caused by Trichinella spiralis and is contracted by consuming undercooked meat, which releases the larvae and allows them to encyst in muscle tissue. Infection can cause fever, muscle pains, and digestive system issues. Severe infections can lead to lack of coordination, breathing, and heart problems, and even death. Filariasis is an infectious tropical disease caused by any one of several thread-like parasitic roundworms. The two species of worms most often implicated in this disease are Wucheria bancrofti and Brugia malea. The larval form of this parasite transmits the disease to humans through the bite of a mosquito. In the earliest stages of the infection, the patient characteristically complains of fevers, chills, and headaches and skin lesions. Any of one of several parasitic agents may be effective in eliminating the worm. However, if the disease is left untreated, obstruction of the lymph flow will cause particular areas of the body, especially the legs and external genitals, to swell profoundly. Symptoms are primarily a response to adult worms that cause the inflammation. Chronic inflammation may progress to hardening of the lymphatic vessels, fibrosis, and obstruction of the lymph flow. One of the scarier ones is the guinea worm, or Dracunculus mediensis, which causes dizziness, vomiting, diarrhea, and painful ulcers on the legs and feet when the worm works its way out of the skin. Infection typically occurs after a person drinks water containing water fleas, or Daphnia, not really fleas, but they're freshwater crustaceans, infected by the guinea worm larva. In the mid-1980s, there were estimated 3.5 million cases of guinea worm disease, but the disease has been largely eradicated. In 2014, there were only 126 cases that I could find that were reported thanks to a coordinated effort between several NGOs and the World Health Organization to help that were committed to improvements in drinking water sanitation around the world. Looking at the Platyhelminthes, the flatworms, this group includes flukes, tapeworms, and tubularians, which include planarians. The flukes and tapeworms are medically important parasites in humans. The flukes, or trematodes, are non-segmented flatworms that have an oral sucker, and sometimes a second ventral sucker as well, and they attach to the inner walls of the intestines, lungs, large blood vessels, or the liver. Trematodes have complex life cycles, often with multiple hosts. Several important examples are the liver flukes, the intestinal fluke, and the oriental lung fluke. Schistosomiasis is a very serious parasitic disease, considered second in the scale of its impact on human population, only to malaria. The parasites Schistosoma mansoni and Schistosoma hemotabium, which are found in freshwater snails, are responsible for schistosomiasis. Immature forms burrow through the skin into the blood, and they most often infect people when they are swimming in water where their secondary hosts, snails, are endemic. Hence the name swimmer's itch attached to the initial infection phase. They migrate to the lungs and then to the liver and then later on to the other organs. Symptoms include anemia, malnutrition, fever, abdominal pain, fluid buildup, and sometimes even death. The other medically important group of Platyhelminthes are commonly known as tapeworms, or cestodes, and they are segmented flatworms that may have suckers or hooks on the scolex, or the head region. Tapeworms use these suckers or hooks to attach to the wall of the small intestine. The body of the worm is made up of segments called proglottids that contain reproductive structures. These detach when the gametes are fertilized, releasing gravid proglottids with eggs. Tapeworms often have an intermediate host that consumes the eggs, which then hatch into a larval form called an iconosphere. The iconosphere migrates to a particular tissue or organ in the intermediate host, where it forms a cyst. After being eaten by the definitive host, the cyst develops into an adult tapeworm in the host digestive system. Just about every vertebrate organism has some type of tapeworm parasite adapted to it, as do some invertebrate organisms as well. Tinea saginata, the beef tapeworm, and Tinea solium, the pork tapeworm, enter humans through ingestion of undercooked contaminated meat. The adult worms develop and reside in the intestine, but the larval stage may migrate and find other body part locations such as skeletal and smooth muscle. The beef tapeworm is relatively benign, although it can cause digestive issues and occasionally allergic reactions. The pork tapeworm can cause more serious problems when the larvae enter the intestine and colonize other tissues, including those of the central nervous system. Dibothrium latum is the largest human tapeworm and can be ingested in undercooked fish. It can grow to a length of 15 meters. That's like 45 feet. Echinochus granulosus is the dog tapeworm, and it can sometimes parasitize humans, and it uses dogs as an important host. This is a picture of Echinococcus granulosus, and that's the dog tapeworm. Diphyllobothrium latum is the largest human tapeworm, again, and I said it can be growing up in a length of 15 meters. And this is usually gotten from or obtained by humans from eating uncooked or raw fish. Now, if you're a lover of sushi, as I am, you really don't have that much to worry about, because most of the time this tapeworm is found in freshwater fish, not saltwater fish, which is where we get most of our sushi fish from. So it's something that you can breathe a little bit easier on. Well, that's all I've got to say about the tapeworms for right now. We are going to cover parasites in lab later on in the semester, and you will get an in-depth and up-close look at these guys and their life cycles and more of their medical significance in humans. But until then, please write down any questions that you may have that you got from watching the lecture, and write down any questions that you think that I might ask on an exam. And we will see you in the next lecture.